Terrific.
Oh, shucks.
Of course. So I've got 6 o'clock. So why don't we go ahead and presume that we have an audience? I'm sure we do. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick this off then. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a forum to provide you information about the proposed additional general revenue, sales, and use tax. It's presented to you by the local League of Women Voters members, Teton County Library, and our local media, who are represented by the News and Guide, Buckrail, KHOL Radio, and Wildfile. My name is John Heberger Jr., and as a League of Women Voters member, I will be acting as the moderator for tonight's forum. This is the first of 5, which should help you understand the issues and the candidates that will be on the ballot that you work with. Tonight's forum is intended to provide you, the members of the Teton County electorate, with information on that ballot item. Again, the proposed additional general revenue, sales, and use tax. That's how you will see it on your ballot. It's also sometimes referred to as the general penny or the 7th cent or simply the additional 1 cent sales tax. So participating in tonight's forum are our media panelists who will be posing questions. That's Lindsay Vallon of Buckrail and Billy Arnold of the News and Guide. Teton County staff will provide a short description summary of the ballot issue, and that will be Mo Murphy, our county clerk, and Larry Pardee, our town administrator. Town and county electeds who will address the questions posed by our media panelists are Arn Jorgensen, Jonathan Schechter, Jim Stanford, County, Mark Barron, Luther Probst, and Mark Newcomb. So the structure of this forum this evening will be that we'll have that short summary from Larry and Mo. Then the entire rest of the program will simply consist of our media panelists posing questions to our town councilors and county commissioners who will provide the answers to those questions. We'll look to have questions of about a minute or less each, and then there will be 5 minutes time for responses from our electeds to each of the questions. Now, the intent of the forum is to maximize the information for you, our electorate, and as such, it's not realistically possible to have every councilor and every commissioner answer every question. You know, there simply isn't enough time. We've asked them to provide information that someone else has not already offered. I've asked that each of our electeds go ahead and raise their hand after the question is posed, and I will try and spread the opportunity to respond around amongst our councilors and commissioners. We will try and keep this close to 5 minutes of total response time for each question. And we are looking to try and have at least 10 and maybe 11 or 12 or even 13 questions that they respond to. So this will have to be kept pretty tight. We do have a timing help in that the League of Women Voters, Susan Dong, hi Susan, will be going ahead and letting our electeds know when there's 30 seconds left and when ideally we'll try and wrap this up. If one of the questions really has some really strong discussion, we'll try and let that go just a little bit longer, but we can't do too much of that. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Larry and Mo to go ahead and give their short 6-minute explanation of the ballot item. Larry, Mo.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna kick it off, Larry.
Yep.
It's all planned. Larry, we practiced it.
Yes, I just wanted to share with everybody. Sorry that Curly couldn't make it, but Larry and Mo did.
It's true. I'm Maureen or Mo Murphy. For those of you who don't know me, I was appointed to be the Teton County Clerk when Sherry Daigle retired on June 1st. So I've been in my role for about 4 months now, and it's exciting. I wanted to give one quick update before I go into the general penny, but one of my duties as clerk is I'm the election officer for the county as well as the budget officer for the county. But we had when I left today, we had 1,076 people already come in and vote in person, and we're averaging about 200 to 250 ballots come back a day. So it's about 14% of our registered voters have voted already. And I want to thank you guys, especially for all the forums you put on and getting the word out. My goal as clerk is to get everybody to vote. So, and to be educated on their vote. So thank you. So the general penny, I'm just going to give you a little background on the county budget and how the process works for us. So all sales tax collectors, they process with the state of Wyoming directly. So they send it at the end of the month. We get the receipts 2 months later. So we got our disbursement for September, which was July's numbers, and the county was down about 16% over last year, with $963,000 in revenue for July. For this fiscal year, though, we budgeted the county revenue budget line was down 50% from last year. So first month in, we're doing okay. We'll see how the rest of the year goes, but our county budget within the general fund is about $36.5 million, which includes a large majority of departments. The only ones it doesn't is Fire EMS, Parks and Rec, ISWR, Housing. They have their own funds. And our total budget with the SPET monies and other funds is $79.8 million for this year. Our process in February and March, we start the process of budgeting for the 55 budgets. With all the department heads and elected officials submitting to the clerk's department. The departments submit their budget request, the clerk's office puts it all together, and then the commissioners interview the departments and decide on the final numbers. With the departments, the health and human service contracts, and other entities. And then it's finalized at the end of June. So our 5-year average of a general penny in the last 5 years would be about an additional $8 million to the county. Our county budget is made up of about 27% from sales tax. And as you know, it would go into the general fund, so it wouldn't be earmarked for anything. And I'm turning it over to Larry.
League of Women Voters, thank you to all of you for taking time and allowing us a few minutes to just give a quick update of the county and the town budget. I'm going to start quick with the 7 cent. The pre-COVID 1 cent sales tax that's up for discussion is estimated to collect about $16 million. We split that 55-45 between town and county. It's based on population between the two municipalities or the local agencies. It's estimated that the collections of that approximately 16 million, again, this is pre-COVID, 50+% is paid by the guest visitor. Should the voters approve the 1 cent in November, the collections will not start until sometime in the spring of 21, approximately April. So that would potentially allow for about 3 months collection for the remainder of this fiscal year, which would be April, May, and June. Also, the town is going to track, if this was approved by the voters, we are going to track that 1 cent to show the community how those funds come in and where the council makes those financial investments back to the community so that they have an annual updated report of what investments are made. Just a quick couple of snapshots of the town's budget this year. Just like Teton County, we reduced our estimated sales and use tax and lodging tax by 50%. It represents it's over 70% of our revenue to support our general fund. Just for contrast, last year, all town fund sources combined, the council approved a $64 million budget. This year, council approved a $40 million budget. That's $24 million less, or 33% reduction. Our sales and use tax so far for the month of July is down 24% for the town of Jackson. Other notes, key notes that I just wanted to share is we froze 13 positions in our organization that just happened to be transitioning to other jobs, so we froze them. We spent down $4.8 million of our rainy day fund reserve. We also reduced our expenditures by $4.7 million in our 39 programs in the general fund. A couple other tidbits of information the community should know about. The town of Jackson's capital improvement, we as the owners of, or the stewards of the citizens' assets and infrastructure own $220 million of public infrastructure and assets. We are currently underfunding it by about 2.5. We also deferred over $4 million in capital improvement projects this year. And the last two sound bites, because I got the 30-second warning, are we deferred $1 million payment to our housing supply plan. And we also deferred an $850 payment into the public transportation, the new route plan that's been reviewed and discussed. So that's a quick overview of the town of Jackson. Again, thank you everyone for your time, and we're here. I'll be here to help if they have questions for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you both for the overview. We're into what is the far and away the bulk of the program now, and we're going to, we have until 7:30. We're going to try and get as many questions in as we can, about 5 minutes worth of response time from our electeds. So I'm going to turn this over to Lindsay and Billy, respectively from Buckrail and News and Guide, to pose the first question. And remember, electeds, please, if you would, if you wish to try and answer that question, let me know, and I'll go ahead and try and distribute the opportunity so that we don't try and talk over each other. Thanks. Billy, Lindsay.
Sure. I'll kick it off with what may be a straightforward question and may not be. I'm just kind of curious. There's 6 elected officials represented here today, and I was just wondering if the elected officials could let us know which of them supports the 7th penny sales tax and which of them generally opposes it at this point.
You just want us to raise our hands, or?
It depends what view is it. Maybe if we go around one at a time and say support or oppose, that would be the best.
Roll call. Jonathan, I'll start. I strongly support it.
Arne Jorgensen, strongly support it.
Jim Stanford, support it.
Luther Probst, support.
Yeah, this is Commissioner Newcomb. I support it. I want to remind folks that it will come back to the voting public in a couple years. So we get a chance to kick the tires, and that gives me personally a chance also to see how we can handle the revenue and if we meet the true needs that we are going to bring up later tonight.
On behalf of the working families in this community, I do not support a 17% increase in sales tax.
Got it. Thank you. And just to ask a follow-up, Commissioner Newcomb, could you just explain what you mean that it will come back again in a few years to the voters?
Yeah, I wish I had the statute in front of me, but if the voters approve this, then I believe that it's in place for only 2 years, and it would take a resolution to actually change that. After 2 years, then the voters have another chance to vote for it again or not. The 5th penny that's in place now went through that cycle for a fair amount of time, and I don't know whether it was 8 years or 10 years. A fairly bit of time until there was actually a resolution approved to make it permanent. The reason I wish I had the statute in front of me is I can't recall if there is a period of time before that resolution can actually be approved and passed. So I can't remember if the tax needs to be approved at least once or twice, and maybe someone else here has that knowledge, but that would be my assumption, that we would see it on the ballot again in 2 years.
Looks like Jim Stanford, you had a clarification.
Yes, thanks, John, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and the library. Just to help mark out, it's a 4-year tax collection period, and then it would have to be voted on twice before and approved twice before town and county should they choose to take that step of making it permanent. So it's a 4-year tax.
No, very good. Thanks, Jim.
Anything else, or should we move on to the next question?
I think we can move on to the next question. That'll do it for me.
Lindsay, Billy?
Oop.
Lindsay, you're muted.
Thank you. Some community members say that the general penny would not be needed if money management was better. Can we achieve community goals by tightening our belts?
Who would like to address that? Mark Newcomb, and then Arn.
Well, just to get to the heart of the matter, I have real concerns that one of our fundamental services, and it's one that is a combined partnership with a lot of private entities in town, and that's the human services network, may end up severely underfunded. And that's primarily why I support the tax. They provide at least $12 million worth of services, probably more. Typically, they get about 5 million or so from federal and state grants, mostly federal grants. But the state portion of those is going to get cut. Some portion of the federal grants are going to get cut. They could end up with a $3 million hole. And they do fundraise, but they raise about $5 million. And I think I'm always aware of donor fatigue in that area. I think this past year in particular, the community has been exceptionally generous, and they've stepped up and really helped out through the Community Foundation in 122. But it's, it's really hard to measure the effectiveness of the safety net, but there's such a compelling human story and need behind having one, whether it's mental health counseling, whether it's rehabilitation services, whether it's community entry services, literacy services, 122 and all the services they provide. I would just hate to see that safety net weaken under the pressures of the cuts being made at the state level. And I really think that this is an important way we could provide a real key backstop for our human services.
Arn, you had your hand up. Do you want to add something to that?
I would. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mark.
And then perhaps to Jonathan.
So when the town council reviewed this in January at the retreat, we were looking at a number of unmet community priorities, primarily housing, transportation, conservation, and health and human services. And health and human services, Mark just touched on, which I couldn't agree more with the comments he made. Those were needs that we had pre-COVID. They're also needs we continue to have post-COVID. COVID has then added an additional element of recovery elements. In order to make this budget work this year, we're using 1/2 of our reserves at the town, and we're cutting 30% off of our budget between last fiscal year and this year. Those are unsustainable numbers. And the way our finances are set up right now to meet the services the community is asking for, services that I agree with, that's a greater demand than the revenues are keeping up with. Even without COVID, we would be in this same situation. We would have been making the same request in my mind. And if we don't get additional revenue streams, using the words of the governor, who made a comment about the state budget about a month and a half ago, ask me about any component of state government and I will tell you how much it's going to hurt. I would say the same about the town of Jackson's budget. We are in a scenario where it will hurt everything across the board if we don't get some additional revenue. And I think Jonathan may want to add something to that.
Jonathan, a short response.
Thank you, John and Arn, Mark. To set a piece of context for this entire evening, the town of Jackson and the county have different funding structures. The town of Jackson, as Larry talked about, gets about 70% of its general revenue from sales taxes. It's a smaller share for the county because the county also levies a property tax, which the town does not. And so for the audience and for the press, part of what you may hear over the course of the evening may sound a little bit different, whether a county person or a town person is responding because of our different dependencies. And the second piece of that, and it ties into something Arn alluded to, is you're almost asking a philosophical question, because what has happened over the past, our funding mechanism where we get such a large chunk, the town of Jackson is more dependent upon sales taxes than the state of Wyoming is on hydrocarbons. And that's just the reality because of the way that the state government has set up the funding of local government. And as a result, the town of Jackson, as as we have become more and more sophisticated, as we've grown as a community, people have looked to us for a higher level of services, faster response time for fire and EMS and cops, better, more active plowing, and a variety of things like that. So if we are going to continue to provide that level of service for the town of Jackson, we're going to have to somehow plug that $4.8 million hole. If we cut back on our expenditures significantly to plug that hole, then the levels of service and the amount of service that we can provide will have to be reduced. If we get the 7th cent, then we will be able to provide that additional level of service that the town residents and businesses have become used to. And so that's the reality facing the town of Jackson. Somehow we've got to plug a $4.8 million hole, either by new revenues or by budget cuts.
All right, we're over our time on this one, but I'm going, Mark Barron put his hand up. This is an important topic. We'll let this go another minute or so. Mark Barron.
Thank you very much. As I said when I opened, we always hear this is a one. First of all, I want to compliment and say that, you know, the elected officials who are on here tonight, it's a joy to work with them. I really respect them. We have different opinions on this. And as Jonathan said, the experience of the town of Jackson is different than the experience at Teton County in terms of revenue. But, you know, that said, a 17% increase in sales tax is what we're looking at with 1 penny. Yes, the visitors will be responsible for about 55% of the gross revenue. The locals will be responsible for 100% of that 17% increase. I do want to point out that the town of Jackson over the last 10 years, as through last year, I don't think it's fair to use the COVID year, is collecting $7,223,000 more per year today in sales and lodging tax. That's a pretty good, that's really close to the 7.2 million additional money that this 1 penny, 17% increase will provide. I would also add that Teton County today, Jonathan brought up our property taxes. Over the last 10 years, Teton County is collecting $6,068,000 more per year. I'm sorry, $6,068,000 more per year than they were 10 years ago. That's a 90% increase, and it's coming in every year. And on sales tax revenue, Teton County is collecting more than almost $8.7 million more per year, an 84% increase in sales and use taxes. So, you know, we have a lot of revenue coming in over the last 10 years. Do we have a revenue problem, or do we have a spending choice problem? I would just add that I don't think it's fair or reasonable for the working people in this community to be paying a 1 penny sales tax that goes to conserving anything. Their job is to conserve whatever income they have left to get themselves and their families through the day, through the week, through the month. Thank you.
Okay, I know there's interest in further answering this question, but let's go ahead and move on to additional questions here. Sorry, Jim. So either Billy or Lindsay, if you have another question, and maybe you can weave, Jim, your intended response back into that later here.
Sure. Well, I guess I'll follow up with the question that I think will probably continue the conversation. When the town and county were finalizing their budgets for the current fiscal year, the county was able to cut a smaller percentage from its general fund budget than the town. Most people that argued that the county was able to do so because it has different streams of revenue from the town, as many people here have mentioned tonight, the property tax is one of them. But Commissioner Barron, you argued when I chatted with you on the phone that it wasn't necessarily a property tax issue or a different streams of revenue issue, that it was about a spending problem, as you mentioned, and saying that basically that the town had increased its spending at a higher rate than the county. Can you explain why you said that? And then to maybe the town councilors on the line. I know I chatted with a few of you around then, and Larry Pardee, I chatted with you as well. And some of you pushed back on that sentiment. And could you maybe address why you felt that was misleading?
Mark, you're muted. Mark Barron.
You want me or Larry, Billy?
Why don't you start,
Why
Mark?
don't you first?
So just looking at the spending, the town had been spending more as a percentage of their gross income than the county over those years. Each of us as an elected official has to make tough choices on the budget every year. This is a tough choice that the electorate will make on whether they want to increase their sales tax or not. It's not an easy thing to go through the budget. It consumes about 1/3 to 40% of our year with our staff and with ourselves. I disagree with some of the spending choices that the county has made. I don't understand why we would buy a property across the street from Town Hall if we're not going to grow government, and if we're in a community whose principal goals is to keep the population from growing much at all. And we make choices to add additional hires, and the town and the county do this together. We also make choices to invest in plans like crazy. We spend millions of dollars on planning in Teton County and the town of Jackson. And I won't bore you with the list of plans, but these are spending choices that we have to make. Thank you.
Jim and then Luther, both hopefully short, concise responses.
Thanks, John. Everybody's in favor of belt tightening until the service that they depend upon is what's proposed to be cut. So when somebody just goes on and on about belt tightening in general, I say, what are you going to cut? And, belt tightening sounds great until you show up at the rec center with your kid and it's closed at the time you want to use it, or your street doesn't get plowed when you need to get out in the morning. So these types of this type of bluster is nothing new. Commissioner Barron has cited something in particular, and that was the town's purchase of a property across from Town Hall for a future use as a town hall annex, so to speak. Our building opened in 1986, and it's not that anyone that you see here in this forum is trying to grow the government. The government has grown because the community has grown, and as mayor, Commissioner Barron presided over some of that growth. So we can get into a discussion about growth and whether government is creating it or whether government is just trying to scramble to respond to the growth that's already occurring. I would argue for the latter. And the way the costs have risen is so dramatic, especially on the town side, where we don't have $12 million a year in property tax revenue to help cover these costs, which the county receives, as well as payment in lieu of taxes from the federal government. I mean, in 2010, the amount of money that the town had to spend on funding our joint fire and EMS department was roughly $1 million. The request for fiscal year 2021 was $2 million. That's 100% increase in 10 years. And if you go back to 2016, it's up 30%. These are real increases, and I'm only citing this as an example of a critical service that we all rely on. We could go through the numbers of the town budget, and we could present a pretty compelling case that the costs, everybody knows the cost of doing business here is going up. Government is not immune to that. Government is desperately trying to keep up with these costs.
Luther, did you have a short addition to that?
Yes, thank you. First, thank you for hosting this, everyone that is doing so. I just wanted to summarize quickly why I think this tax is important and why I support it. We have an increase in population. We have an increase in retirees. We have an increase in visitation We particularly have an increase in the effective population, including the people who come into the community, commute into the community to work. And we have a drop in state revenue. The key point is that our local quality of life is our economic engine. It's what attracts retirees, visitors, people from other communities that want to move here to live and work. And our quality of life costs money. And so I view our investment in our quality of life is just essential to maintain what we value here. And it's why, in the face of increased pressure and dropping in state revenue, we have to support this tax. Thank you.
Okay, let's go ahead and try and keep moving along in questions here. Mark, you have your hand up, but let's go ahead and see if we can get that in via another question perhaps. So Lindsay, I think you're up next maybe with a question.
Yes. So if the general penny does not pass, what does that mean for the town and county, and what major budget items might suffer? And I want to know specifically what would be on the chopping block first, and yeah.
Mark Newcomb, you had your hand up and you just have it up, so go ahead if you would, and then Arn next.
Sure, thank you. And I do want to express appreciation to the League of Women Voters and the library, and you, John, and Leah. Thank you very much for hosting this program. Just a quick point. First of all, 10 years ago, the town and the county had gone through the worst budget reductions that they'd experienced in years. $5 million between 2009 and 2010. Those were on top of another 20% reduction in 2008 to 2009. So measuring from 2010 to now, you're definitely going to get a bump in overall expenditures. If you want to go back to 2006, 2007, 2008, it might look a lot different. You know, it's pretty hard for one commissioner to say what would be on the chopping block first, because it is a lengthy negotiation. I do want to point out that I think probably all of us ran on slogans that are popular. You know, we need to further boost public transportation. Some might argue for more housing. The county, part of the increase in the county's expenditures has definitely been for simply housing our employees. That's been to the tune of over $2 million a year funding that we cut this year. And that's a reality that any significant employer has to face. And we would be whistling past our grave if we weren't putting that money into housing for our employees. Hiring top-notch employees simply requires having a place for them to land, at least for a short period of time. So that's a very significant reason why there's been an increase in revenue, and there is a new need for revenue. You know, I think people could argue over whether or not we should spend more money for contributing to the housing authority to help our workforce, that same workforce that Commissioner Barron speaks of, that is paying more sales tax. What they really need is secure housing, safe housing, affordable housing within the range of their wages. And so it's that boils down to a significant reason why there's a need for this. But every year the priorities would be set, they'd be rearranged. If we want fair, free start, we absolutely need more revenue. If we don't receive this, again, I don't know that we'll be cutting a whole lot. We may not be funding housing for our employees. We may not be funding human services to the extent that they're needed. And we would probably be looking at cutbacks in services around parks and rec and some other areas, but it's hard to say from the position of one commissioner now.
Okay, Arn, and I'll ask everybody again to remember just to try and keep the answers as short as you can, concise, so we can get more of you in. Go ahead, Arn, you had your hand up next.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to build briefly on one of Mark's comments about the previous 10 years. Commissioner Barron made the comment about the additional revenue that we've received, roughly $7 million. During that same period of time, we increased about $5 million in our general fund, which is effectively our rainy day account, which, as Mark Newcomb alluded to, had been spent down because of the recession. So much of that increased revenue was, as was just talked about, was coming out of that recession. As any one vote or any one elected official, I can't give you the specifics you're asking for, Lindsay. I can tell you that the same quote I made before that the governor made relative to the state budget, it will hurt across the board. Our emergency service call volumes last year went up, I believe, 30%. And we've been able to meet that demand, but we've had to draw down reserves to be able to do that. And that's just not a sustainable tool. And other costs have also been going up. And I can't say this more emphatically, that it will be across the board in the town. Now, the town has a different picture than the county does, as we talked about. And I don't want to revisit that, but it will be very significant cuts. People will see it. And I think I would also want to touch on the health and human services, because we should be doing better in the realm of health and human services. We on both making up what we're going to lose in the state funding that was talked about earlier, as well as increasing the level of service because of COVID. Commissioner Barron very appropriately talked about the working folks in this community. They are getting hit very hard. We need to be increasing the services to them. This revenue gives us the time to do that.
Okay, I'm going to ask Jonathan to go ahead and try and give a short additional response here. You're muted, Jonathan. Your time is fleeting.
Okay, I'm going to try and share the screen because Lindsay, I got some specifics. None of us can sit here and tell you what we're actually going to cut because, as Mark Newcomb said, it is a negotiation process. But from the perspective of the town of Jackson, we have, this is our reality. This red line here, that's 4.8 million bucks that we've got to cut if we don't get extra money. That's the hole that we're trying to plug. Right here are the things that we're spending this year our money on. Cemetery pathways, these are non-core services, townwide services, community initiatives, community health and human services, that's our grants to our nonprofits, Parks and Rec. If you take all those and you add them together, we still have a $1.9 million hole. How are we going to get rid of that $1.9 million hole? We could wipe out our entire public works department and still not get there. So no more plowing, no more street repair, no more nothing. What else do we spend money on? We spend money on all this other stuff. This is just the general government, judge, administration, attorney, mayor and town council, community development, IT. This red line shows that $1.9 million in core services if we got rid of this. Or finally, we could get rid of public safety. We could get rid of all of our building inspection, animal sheltering control, victim services, the communication center, the dispatch, and fire EMS. We'd start to get there. So this is sort of the order of magnitude of the kinds of things that we would have to cut. It can't just be core, non-core services. It's also going to cut into the core services. Thanks.
Okay, let's move on to the next question. I'm sure there'll be other opportunities to address this. Billy, Lindsay, one of you has a question next. You're muted.
There we go. So to take a slightly different approach to this, I think a question that we both had was, if this is passed, do you think there's any risk of this affecting our local businesses? And thinking of shops where, people make large purchases, ski shops, bike shops, car dealerships. Do you think Jacksonites could end up taking their business elsewhere regarding large purchases, where that on large purchases where that extra cent could add up to a substantial amount more of money?
Jim Stanford had his hand up first, so go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, Billy. Sadly, a lot of Jackson Hole residents are already taking their business elsewhere. It's not that one more penny to have to pay on your $3 latte is going to suddenly break the bank here. A lot of people do their shopping elsewhere. Personally, it's not the way I like to live, but Dave Auger from Teton Motors, there was an article in the News and Guide, it may have been your article when this discussion first came up. and he's in the business of automobile sales. And that's one of the biggest purchases that's going to be affected by a 1 cent increase in sales tax. And, you know, to my surprise and pleasant surprise, Dave was very honest about it and shrugged it off and said, people can afford this. It's not going to stop people from buying cars. And I think my colleague, Jonathan Schechter, can give you more information about how, you know, sales are going up and up and up all the time, skyrocketing. You know, paying an extra dollar on your $100 dinner is not going to break the bank for a lot of people. You know, if history is any guide regarding cuts, what happened during the last recession, especially on the town side, is that Health and Human Services got cut. There were across the board reductions in level of service, snow plowing, you name it. But Health and Human Services took a big hit because, unlike the county, the town is not mandated to provide those services. The town has stepped up significantly in recent years to help and make those investments. But you know, that burden will fall more on the county, I suppose, in the future.
Luther had his hand up. Luther, short response.
Yes, thank you. The sales tax in Driggs, Idaho is 6.5%. I don't think many people are going to travel to Idaho. Statewide sales tax in Idaho is 6%. We're only talking about a half a penny difference if I'm going shopping, at least for groceries in Driggs. So I think there's a small consequence. The flip side of that is that the improvements that we can make in our quality of life and our pathways and the quality of our roads and so forth is again, what attracts people to Jackson. People don't come here because it's a cheap place to vacation. They come here because of the quality of life, and that costs money. Thank you.
Okay, Mark Barron had a hand up. Go ahead, Mark, unmute.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is going to be a big hit for business. Some businesses will have their price points affected by this, but I trust the business people are savvy enough to find a way to market through this. I do have concerns. Not everybody can afford a $100 dinner, and I know Jim didn't mean that, but we forget that this sales tax, I'm not arguing for me, I'm arguing for those people who live on the margins today. And I understand, and I hear the words that those are the very people that we want to help by increasing their sales tax so that government can then spend more on them. But, you know, if you would ask these people, do you live within your budget? They don't have a lot of choice. Have you and your family experienced a loss of income or an interruption in your income this year? Have you been laid off? Have you lost hours at work? Are you finding yourself watching your children at home, one of two parents, alternating perhaps, because school isn't fully open? There have been real consequences on the working individuals in this community. And some are going to say, sure, it's a 1 penny sales tax. It's a 17% increase in the sales tax burden that people are going to be paying. So call me a bad guy. I care about that.
Okay, Arn, a real short one.
Really, really shortly, and I wouldn't be calling any of us a bad guy. We're all making choices in what we believe here. Just to make it really clear, food, not prepared food. So food when you go to the grocery store is exempt. So the core piece of what people are buying day in and day out from a survival standpoint is exempted. Now that is not to say there won't be other places at the hardware store, other things like that would be impacted. And Mark is absolutely correct. And I'm perfectly aware of that when we get into this discussion. The other piece about shopping outside the Valley, when people shop online today, we're now getting that sales tax revenue in the vast majority of the cases. So I don't think this is a significant push for business leaving the Valley. I think it's important for us to remember that. But food is exempt. Prepared food in the grocery stores where you go to the deli is still taxed, or if you go to the restaurant, it's still taxed. But I think it's important to understand that distinction.
Okay, let's move on to the next question then from either Lindsay or Billy, whichever one of you has it next.
Okay, so for community members, why should this added 1 cent tax not feel like we're handing the town and county a blank check? And then what, if any, advance guarantees can you give about how the money will be spent and how that will be transparently shown to the community?
Arn,
Lindsay, thank you for that question. It is the thing that I'm probably the most passionate about when I get into these discussions. Transparency and accountability are absolutely critical. As we've been talking about, there isn't an aspect of local government that won't be hurt if we do not, in the town of Jackson at least, I can't speak for the county, that would not be impacted by this. If you care about these services, I can all but guarantee as one elected official that we will struggle providing those services if we don't get the additional revenue. The accountability is on us. It's on the people on this Zoom call and the other 4 that are not here, the elected officials. Holding the tool hostage will not ensure accountability. Hold me hostage, hold the rest of us on this Zoom hostage. Don't vote for us if we're doing things incorrectly. From my standpoint, well, there'll be other questions for me to get into in terms of what we spend it on, but it's a series of priorities, recovery. I can get into those when some other questions maybe, but my real key point is hold me as an elected official accountable. That's where the transparency resides. The last point I would say is the town is setting up a peer review committee within our priority-based budget process that would also help bring in additional voices within the community to help us look at these budgets and help doing the tracking and checking us that Larry referred to earlier.
okay, Luther, and then Mark Newcomb. We'll see if we can get to you, Jim.
Lindsay, thank you for your question. One of the reasons why I support this tax is that it is a blank check, if you will. The voters have been very receptive to SPET taxes, to the special purpose taxes, which I'm proud of and glad of. So we're willing to fund wildlife crossings. We're willing to fund a new rec center. The problem we have that has to be addressed by this general tax is we also have to fund natural resource managers to coordinate the management of wildlife crossings. We have to fund lifeguards to man to staff the swimming pool. And so this is a more general tax that allows us to use funds, among other things, to provide the services that are enabled by the capital spending. So it is important to recognize that this does allow us to spend money more freely than the SPET measures, because that's essential for us to do.
Mark Newcomb.
I was ready.
Yeah, thank you. I first was going to say quickly that for the county, we need to remember that the treasurer keeps a keen eye on all the revenues coming in, and the treasurer is an elected official. The clerk keeps a keen eye on all the revenue that's going out, and the clerk is an elected official. And that's a remarkable job. The commissioners look at all the vouchers, every single penny that is spent, and we pick up on things like, you know, if the sheriff has a soft serve ice cream cone on the way back from an important training conference, it's there. And you know, there was one $5.25 from Teton County to YDOT for something up there at Cattleman's Bridge. All of that stuff is public. All of our budget negotiations now are public, and anyone who wants to find out what revenue came in can go to the treasurer and ask. Anyone who wants to find out where that revenue went can go to the clerk and ask. The commissioners are accountable by election. The clerk and the treasurer are both elected officials. And then I do want to build on what Luther said, which is it is a blank check, just like all of our other general fund revenue, whether it's the other sales tax that we collect, whether it's the property tax we collect. And there's a real argument to be made that a fiscally conservative commission would be careful and thoughtful and strategic about the capital things that we build, the new rec centers, and make sure that we not only have the money to build that rec center, but we do have the money to operate it. And that's where the SPET can get us in trouble. The SPET often puts out there a great amenity, whether it's a pathway, a bigger rec center, and people love the idea, and it really is a valuable amenity to a lot of people. they vote for it, and then we need to 5, 10, 15, 50 years later continue to fund it. And so it might make a lot more sense to actually reduce the number of items we put out there for the spec ballot, have more revenue, and carefully choose which capital projects we really need. And right now we really need a Hoback fire station. And this extra revenue would get that done just like that.
Mark Barron, I invite you in and cut you off. So if you have a short thing to add to this one, we're about at the end of the time for this one. Go ahead.
Sure, it is there are no constraints on the general fund sales tax. I did want to point out that nobody has talked about the lodging tax, which can be doubled, which does pay 100% of the town and the county's operational expenses, does pay 100% of the pathways, does contribute to fire EMS, some parks and rec services, and does not cost locals a penny unless they book short-term lodging. And just so taxpayers know, the state of Wyoming backfilled the town from their COVID relief funds, some $5 million recently, and backfilled the county some $6.1 million recently. So the sky hasn't fallen on government. We do have tough choices to make, and that's our job.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question, but I'm going to go ahead and say that Jim Stanford gets first shot at answering it. He's been waving his hand. So our media panelists, next question, please.
There we go. So this is actually a question from the audience that I just throw out there. It goes to a point that Mark Barron made before, and the question reads as follows. I'm curious if there are other elected officials who want to speak in favor of the general penny on behalf of working families. Commissioner Barron seemed to intimate that he is supporting working families by not supporting the general penny. I would like clarification on why families lose if the penny wins.
Jim Stanford first, since he's been waving his hand for a while, and then we'll try and go to Jonathan and Mark Newcomb. Again, try and make concise, short answers if you can.
Thanks, John. I am part of a working family. Virtually all of my friends are have working families. They have needs, though. They have needs for their kids, for daycare, education, recreation. All of these things are expensive. So, there are no working people who have approached me and said, I can't bear to pay one more penny per dollar I spend. To answer that question, Mark Newcomb is absolutely right about the specific purpose tax. We've used it as a community very effectively to build hundreds of millions of dollars of facilities, but there's no money to help maintain and operate those facilities. And when people raise a question about a blank check for this 1 penny of revenue, only 1 penny is dedicated to a specific purpose. The other 5 pennies are a blank check too. So it's a red herring. We have a fully open and transparent budget process. And with one notable exception, nobody showed up to our budget meetings this year to ask for a reduction in the level of service.
Jonathan, real quick, and then Mark Newcomb, real quick, hopefully.
What this boils down to is a philosophical question. On the one hand, Mark Barron is absolutely correct. We're talking about 1 cent here. Are you looking at it as 17% increase, which it is, or are you looking at it as 1 penny, which locals will have to pay no more than half of the total, which would be in the millions of dollars. So it's philosophical. And the question is, from the perspective of the working class people, are they going to be better served by the kinds of things that government will collectively do with all that money than they will be harmed by the extra cost that's going to be out of their pocket? It's a philosophical question. I believe that 9 out of 10 of the elected officials, 5 town councilors and 4 county commissioners, ultimately came down on the side of the community would be served better collectively by taking in that 1 extra cent than individuals would be harmed by paying that 1 extra cent. And so whether it's trying to significantly address our affordable housing needs, trying to significantly help our human and health and social services, trying to significantly help transportation, trying to significantly address environmental concerns, we can do those sorts of things with the extra penny. Those will benefit all of us in the community. And that's not even in, that's why, as Arn mentioned earlier, we talked about this before COVID. Since COVID, it's going to help us collectively avoid cutting back on key services such as street repair, plowing, cops, fire, EMS, and the like. So it's ultimately a philosophical question. And in my perspective, and I think most of my colleagues, the answer is that collectively we would be served well by having a 1 cent increase in our sales tax, rather than the harm that might come to a few individuals, which is not to be sneezed at in any way, but collectively that is our view on how working families would be helped. Thank you.
Let's see, Mark Newcomb, you had your hand up. Go ahead. Let's try and get something in.
Thank you. Just briefly, working families households expenditures are predominantly for housing, predominantly for healthcare. There would be expenditures around daycare and significant expenditures around food. Food purchases are largely not taxed. And so, you know, if there's an increase in sales tax, the burden on that working family is probably pretty slight. What is really killing them is the cost of housing, the cost of healthcare, and we have heard that property tax is hurting a lot of households. And one way that a prudent commission could handle this increase in sales tax is by reducing the property tax. So, you know, we reduced the property tax by just $500,000. It hardly helped anybody, but it did do something. And for those working families who own property, hopefully it helped just a little bit. And if we want to reduce it more, we could use this sales tax revenue to further reduce those property taxes as well.
Luther, you had a short addition?
Just very quick. Several other speakers and I have mentioned the fact that food tax is exempt. That's going to come under fire in this next legislative session. It's important for people that if you do support a progressive form of taxation, to try to maintain that food tax exemption. The worst thing that could happen to working people in this valley from the perspective of state and local taxation would be if food bought in a grocery store is subject to that taxation. Making sure that that food is not taxed is the most important thing we can do in terms of having a progressive tax structure for working families.
Okay, Lindsay, Billy, next question. Unmute.
Okay, so I have a couple questions here from the public, and it seems that people are interested in clarifications about, I know we spoke about it'll be a 4-year tax, but they're wondering if this tax will expire after the deficit is matched, and then also if it could be reversed in the future with a future vote, or if this is something that will go once we hit a 7 penny tax. What's next when we find a deficit in the future?
Jim Stanford and then Mark Barron.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's a 4-year tax. It would run for 4 years. You know, the collection would begin in the spring and it would go for 4 years. If the collections are so robust and tourism returns to pre-COVID levels and the town fiscal structure was markedly improved, it's possible the town could oppose putting that even on the ballot. The town and county could decide in 4 years not to put it to the voters again. But if they did want to continue to receive the revenue, they would have to bring that question back to the voters and the voters would have ultimate say.
Okay, Mark Barron.
I would encourage you not to kid yourself. Government is a living, breathing entity. It's an organism that grows, just is what it is. That's why our spending continues to grow. Our population has not grown very much at all over the last 10 years. That said, once an organization begins spending and begins getting hooked into that spending, those programs that they're going to expand on, conservation programs, affordable housing programs, they're not going to want to give up that revenue in 4 years. Believe me. Affordable housing gets built when private land is zoned for it. And those are the opportunities that we have going forward that don't cost taxpayers anything.
Arn, you had a finger up. Go ahead, please.
A couple of quick points. Commissioner Barron's right. I mean, it will increase the level of services and people's interest in them. And that's a question we'll be facing in 4 years. That 4 years is set by state statute. So there isn't a way, it doesn't go away like spat once you pay something off. I do think it is, these things that, whether it's conservation issues, whether it's affordable housing, those are things the community is asking for. Those are things we should be providing. And, affordable housing, which is a topic that I could go on for hours, is going to be built with three things: public investment, the private partnerships that we do, that Commissioner Barron's referencing, and regulation. And it's all three of those. It's not any one of those. And that's something that I believe very, very strongly about. There was a brief mention about COVID earlier. The state has allocated up to $5 million to the town. That's for reimbursement of direct costs. And that money is federal money through the CARES Act. It's very regulated. We're not sure we have those expenditures that meet those requirements within the town budget. There's ongoing discussions with the state about how wide we can cast that net. That being said, in any fund, COVID's going to be with us well beyond the end of the year when those CARES Act funds leave. And we're talking about increased spending right now at our public health office with investigation, tracking, testing. Those costs are going to continue. Those expenses are going to continue. If we're going to be managing what we're facing with COVID, so businesses can stay open, so schools can stay open, get on an even footing, that's an expenditure that's going to last well beyond what the federal government has done to date, which will end the end of the year. And I think that's an important distinction. Thank you.
Anybody else on this one, or should we go to the next question? Lindsay, Billy?
Yep, I got it. On that issue of time and COVID and budgetary reductions from COVID, Arn, I have a question. Maybe I'll direct this at Jonathan because I read your newsletter and went through the presentation that you put out today, and you talked about that $4.9 million hole in the town's budget. The effective date of this tax wouldn't be until April of 2021, which is a ways away from now. Could you just explain how you see a tax that doesn't go into effect until April of next year plugging a hole that was made in the town's budget this year?
It won't. That's why we use the $4.8 million drawdown from our reserves. We can't take another $4.8 million out of reserves because that would put us below the threshold of reserves that is prudent for any local government entity. And we were able to limit it to only $4.8 million because we also got rid of any new capital spending and we froze a bunch of positions. So we've really cut the budget down to our expenditures down to the bone. And so what would happen next year, Billy, I believe, so if we pass this measure in November by state statute, it would start being collected April 1st. And our next fiscal year starts on July 1st, 2021. And so by the time that new fiscal year starts, we will be collecting that full 1%. So knowing we have those revenues coming in, we would be able to budget accordingly and go ahead. And this, I think, is a really critical thing. We are, as a community, we are reaching a fork in the road. And let's not deceive ourselves. If we get this extra money, we were already being asked, as Arn alluded to, we are being asked by the community to do a bunch of things that usually only much bigger cities do. We're running an interstate transit system. We're trying to build an awful lot of affordable housing. We've got the greatest income inequality of any county in America. And so that has certain social service needs coming along with it. We also have a basically intact and healthy ecosystem, which the vision of the comp plan says is our mission to preserve and protect, which takes some money. These are the things we're being asked to do, but we are taking these 21st century challenges and we're trying to fund them with a 20th century funding mechanism. And the fork in the road that we're coming to on November 3rd is this. If we can get this extra money, then we can have sufficient funds to keep providing the services the community is asking for at current levels and start to do a little bit more. We can plug that budget hole. If we don't get the 7th cent, then we are going to have to make some very difficult decisions about the number of services we do and the quality at which we're doing them. And we're, as Mark Barron said, and he's absolutely right, it requires some tough choices. And if the 7th cent doesn't pass, then we are going to have to make some exceptionally tough choices, particularly on the town side, because we're so dependent on sales taxes. I hope that answers your question.
Other thoughts on Billy's question from other, Arn, go ahead.
I hit it twice. Thank you, Billy. I think it is, when we're using reserves to balance the budget that we did this year, that's a one-time expenditure. And it's based on kind of uncertain knowledge about future revenues. Mo was talking about our sales tax revenue in July was better than we expected. And that better than expected was still more than 20% down. Those unseen revenues don't magically reappear. We don't make them show up again. And this additional revenue gives us the ability to plan more for the future and to provide more stable services. And I think that's an important element. We saw people in town this summer, and there were a lot of people in town. They weren't spending like they used to. So just because we're seeing people doesn't mean we're getting the same revenue from them. And they still have the same demands. They're still looking for the streets to be taken care of and all the other things that we provide to our visitors and our residents.
Jim Stanford.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Billy. I think it's important to note, as others have said earlier, the town had this discussion about pursuing the 7th cent of revenue in January before the pandemic hit. So after coming out of the last recession, we've gone through a 10-year boom. I mean, unprecedented boom. The boom time may be over, we don't know. There are indications it may continue here. But even then, as sales tax collections were very robust, we were staring at a very serious shortfall of revenue. As I said earlier, we don't have the $12 million in annual property tax revenue that Teton County collects or more. There's a hangover after the boom time, and we've seen it. People are feeling it all around this community. The more we have, the more visitation we have, the more people that are moving here, the more services we need to provide.
Okay, let's go on to the next question from our media panelists.
Okay, I have the next question. Why is this 7 cent penny tax better than levying a mill tax in terms of the town or increasing the mill levy for the county? And then also, we did touch on the lodging tax, but the 2% or the 2 pennies that could be added to the lodging tax, why would that not solve our current budgetary issues?
Jim, you just did. So Luther, why don't you go next?
On the county side, regarding the mill levy, the advantage of the sales tax is the fact that 55% is paid by our visitors, and that food is exempt. And so it's a relatively progressive tax. The challenge that we have, in my opinion, with the mill levy is that Wyoming is one of the very few states in this country that does not have a meaningful or a relevant homestead exemption for property taxes. In most states, the first certain percentage of the value of your house is exempt. And then everything above that, and in Jackson, the numbers don't make much sense, but there's an exemption for houses that are at the lower end of value. And that allows the property tax to be significantly more progressive. The problem with the mill levy here is that it really does hurt people such as retirees who are struggling to stay in this town where they've raised their family, where they live, and where they love, and where a community that they really value. And so the mill levy would be a great way to increase revenue in a way that's fair to people if we had that property tax homestead exemption. We do not. And so of the choices we have, the seventh penny is, from what I can gather, the most progressive, because we're able to outsource so much of it to our visitors.
Jonathan?
Jim beat me to it. So would you go to him and then I can kick in, please?
Jim, go ahead. We'll see if maybe that covers what Jonathan wants to say anyway.
Thanks, John, and thanks, Lindsay. The town considered in our January discussion property tax. The property tax, even if we were to levy the full number of mills that the town is permitted, that currently we do not levy any of, the revenue generated would be significantly less than what we're talking about when we're talking about a penny of sales tax. And the most important point is, if we went with property tax, which has some allure to it in terms of equitability and who pays it, it would fall squarely on the backs of town residents, on top of what we're already paying in property tax. Commissioner Barron talked about the increasing taxes. The last thing I think a lot of us would like to do is ask town residents to have to pay more property tax on top of what we're already paying and what our neighbors in Teton County are paying. And in regards to the lodging tax, you may have seen me animated when Commissioner Barron was speaking of it earlier and talking about how it's the tax we don't pay. We're paying for it every day, okay? And that's what's really hurting working families in our community, is they're busting their butts to make a living, and it's getting harder and harder for them to enjoy the very things they came here for, and that why they live here. Okay, because the lodging tax, to me, this is an even better reason to vote for the general penny of sales tax, to make us less reliant on lodging tax. Okay, the more people you draw, the more you promote this place, the more you're trying to pack everything in, the more services we're struggling to provide, and the harder it is for all of us who live here to enjoy this place and go about our daily lives. And that's coming from somebody who works in tourism.
Mark Barron, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just in fairness, the facts are that tourism grew very well for the many years this community did not have a lodging tax. We're the gateway to Grand Teton Yellowstone National Park. If you think the lodging tax is driving that drive business, forget about it. What the lodging tax is doing is paying for the impacts of tourism. That's something we didn't have from 1994 to 2010. We should have that. We should double what we have so we can more responsibly manage our tourism.
Hey, Jonathan, a short one here, short answer.
I'll try, John. Basically, the town has three tools available, and it's almost like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. There's one that's too hard and one that's too soft and one that's just right. If we did a property tax, it would raise about $3 million, which would be far less. I see the sign and I'm going to ignore it for a minute. Thank you. The benefit of the property tax, it would raise about $3 million. That would not plug a $4.8 million hole. The downside of the property tax is that it would be paid 100% by local residents and business owners. At the other end of the extreme, you have the lodging tax. Essentially 100% of it is paid by visitors, but because of state restrictions on it, only 60+% of it, 65% of it has to go to promotion. So it leaves us only 35% that we can actually do something with directly. And then in between, you've got what I would call the just right, which is the sales tax. It raises the most money. 55% of it is paid by visitors, and we have complete flexibility over how we are going to spend it. And one final thing, and I see the sign, thank you, is that, and this gets into the restrictions that we have as a community. We sold so much real estate in 2019, but none of it was taxed, but we sold more real estate than we did a combination of retail, lodging, and restaurants combined, which are our three biggest categories of sales tax. So it's the businesses that have to collect sales tax are only 1/6 of our entire economy. And that is this 20th century funding mechanism trying to deal with a 21st century economy and community that we have. And to me, it's a deeply flawed system, but the things that we can control, the best one by far is the sales tax. Thank you.
Okay, we're at 7:15. We've got 15 more minutes, so a couple more questions. So next question from our media panelists, either Lindsay or Billy. I'm not sure who's up next.
Sure. Just to follow Jonathan's last point there, there have been other types of revenue generating tools proposed, often in the state legislature, that have been shot down. One was a real estate transfer tax. Another was proposed last winter by State Rep Mike Yin, who proposed a tax on empty second homes. Jonathan, and maybe I'll pose this to the rest of the elected officials here as well. What would be your preferred method of taxation if you had to choose?
Jonathan, I guess you
I've
get
been
first shot
talking a
at that.
lot. Let other people go, please.
Say that again, Jonathan. I think I cut you off.
I was just saying, I've been talking a lot. There are 7 very thoughtful people, besides 5 very thoughtful people besides me. So I'll wait till the end, if at all. Thank you.
Luther's hand is up.
Wyoming has the most friendly state tax code in the country for preserving wealth. We could impose an income tax that only applied to the highest incomes. We could even call it the Jackson Hole tax, because a very significant portion of the total would be paid by residents in our county. But we could have an income tax and still be, and I've got the data on this, that could still be, and Wyoming could still remain the most friendly state in the country for preserving wealth. And so we should have a statewide income tax with a local option attached to it. That's progressive, it generates tremendous revenue, and it would only affect a small percentage of the residents in this state. Thank you.
Jim?
I would favor a real estate transfer tax. It was proposed many times by Teton County legislators and sponsored by our representatives of both political parties, but it's been shot down repeatedly by the legislature. It could be structured in a way that only, value of certain values, sales over 2 million are taxed, or however we want to structure it. You could even exempt agricultural lands to make it more palatable and make it a local option. It makes all the sense in the world, but unfortunately our legislature will shoot it down as an ideological knee-jerk reaction, and that's why we're left trying to utilize what few means they have given us to raise revenue. That part of fiscal responsibility is figuring out a way to pay for things.
Other electeds on this one? Good. Jonathan, go ahead.
I'll jump in now if no one else wants to. Yeah, Billy, as I mentioned a minute ago, out of the pie that is the Teton County economy, no more than 1/6 of it provides funding for local government. And that was a very decent system for our community in the late 1960s and early 1970s, when our taxation and local government funding system was set up by the state. But we are now a very, very different place than we were 50 years ago. And yet our funding mechanism hasn't changed at all. And that's a real problem. And so, as I mentioned, real estate would account for about 80% of what we collect in total taxable sales, just real estate alone. As Luther alluded to, we have no income tax, no wealth tax. there's another big chunk of the local economy. We don't tax professional services or lift tickets or Jim Stanford's rafting trips because those are exempt. So there are a number of different things that have really grown in importance here over the last 50 years, which are simply off the table as far as the state's funding mechanism. And the state of Wyoming is looking at their own set of problems for that same basic reason that they set up their system of funding government 50 years ago, and things have changed. And until the legislature sees fit to change how we go about doing things, then we are going to be left with a very limited number of tools. And again, of those tools that the town in particular has available to us, by far the best mechanism for us from that Goldilocks perspective is the 1% increase in sales tax.
Okay, we're at 7:20. I'd like to get two more questions in if we're really efficient with time. Mark Newcomb had his hand up, so I'm going to ask him to provide the first response to the next question from our media panelists.
Sure. And I guess this is a second follow-up on Lindsay's question here. But there's been a lot of talk about cuts if the seventh penny isn't passed. But balancing a budget, you can raise spending, or raise revenue, cut spending. Would people on either the board, and I realize what you're saying before, one commissioner is not a quorum, cannot make a decision, but would people on these boards think of other ways to raise revenue if the seventh penny tax was not passed before making cuts?
Mark, if you're okay answering, say whatever you want. You had your hand up. Go ahead and try to say something.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll try and answer Billy's question. Thank you, Billy, for the question. And by the way, folks, I think we're doing better than the debate last night. So congrats, everyone. Going into this year, the reason I saw I didn't see a huge need for this general penny, except that in the county, in my mind, we have a glaring hole in our efforts to permanently protect key parts of the county, key movement corridors for wildlife, key habitat areas. And I don't always like the private sector has done a magnificent job volunteering a lot of conservation easements, and I want to recognize that and recognize the land trust for their efforts. But there comes a time when a landowner might simply need financial compensation for providing a community benefit if the community benefit is habitat, open space. And it's not everywhere. I'm not at all saying Northern South Park, which has been slated for residential development, is one of those places, but there might be some other key areas, especially when we look at protecting water quality, where we need a fund and we need a means of compensating landowners and not expecting them to always just give. They've been protecting these ranch lands for generations, and the community has benefited for generations from that open space, those scenic vistas, the habitat, the quality of life they provide. So that was one reason why. And then as we entered this era and it became clear that the state revenues were declining, tanking, and human services were in jeopardy, I recognized another true need for this seventh penny. So that's maybe not a direct answer to your question. I think that's the best I can do. And I'll leave it at that for others.
Mark Barron, did you have your hand up?
I did not.
No, okay. Arn, you do. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, John. I think we've addressed, and sorry that I dropped off there. I had an equipment failure, so quickly had to swap out here. I think we've covered the different revenue sources. And this is, as Jonathan says, the just right in our mind. A couple of points that also are important. Several people have talked about SPET. And I think there are things we can do to be better and more efficient at how we go through SPET items and how we add them. And that's something we should be talking about, and something that I definitely look forward to talking about. I don't look at that as a replacement for the additional penny. It's additional ways that we can do things better than we have been doing. I think there's a couple of points, and Mark Newcomb just touched on a few of these. Looking at priorities going into the future, conservation is certainly a big one. Health and Human Services is a big one. And I think those, I don't want to lose sight of those. Those are things we can do that are positive. Those are things that we can do to help our community, both physically and from a community member standpoint. And that's how I'm looking at this, is this is a positive resource that we can bring to bear to help both the ecology in this community as well as the community members.
I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to ask our media panelist, was it Lindsay? Perhaps we have time really for one more question and the answers that go along with that then, hopefully.
Yeah, so I have one more question from the public that I think is important. And we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this person is asking if the 7th cent tax is the legal max, what happens when we run out of money next time?
Anybody care to answer that one? Arn, you have your hand up, and then Jonathan, and then Mark Barron.
I think it's a fabulous question. And to be quite blunt, Jonathan has talked at length about, there's some structural imbalances within our funding streams. This doesn't fix that. This gives us a significant landing pad to be able to look into the future with more nuanced eyes and to spend time with the legislature and to look at some of these other options. I'm not naive enough to look at this and say, this is the catch-all forever and ever. Things will change, priorities will change, economic realities will change. That's a fact. And as we've talked about several times, in 4 years from now, the voters may not approve it again. Those are all things that we will need to look at in the future, the elected officials that are here at the time and the community. When we put this forward, when I think about this as solutions, it's not looking at this as the perfect answer. It's the answer that we control now. It's an answer that addresses our concerns and addresses our needs. It's an answer that 55% are paid for by our visitors, and the key amount of subsistence food is exempt. And I think those are all reasons to vote for this. It doesn't mean we're going to have an easy time in future budget years and balancing revenues and having to look at whether it's property taxes, whether it's lodging taxes. I'm completely comfortable putting in another 2% lodging tax. The reality is it just doesn't deal with the underlying issues that we have in front of us right now. So I think it's not an either or at this point in terms of kind of the long-term fix. Jonathan was, I think it was Jonathan, when I got back on, was talking about some of the, no, I think it was Jim Stanford, talking about some of the other items, the property transfer tax. There are other tools that would really deal with the impacts and the goals and vision that we have in this community, but at the moment, they're just not available to us.
Jonathan, and then Mark Barron.
Build on that, as I was mentioning a minute ago, the way that the state funds itself was established basically in the 1960s and 70s, the way that the state has allowed local governments to fund themselves was established in the late 60s, early 70s. And those mechanisms were very appropriate for the state of Wyoming at the time and for most of its municipalities and counties at the time. Things have changed a lot, certainly in our community. Ultimately, the legislature is going to have to come up with a mechanism that is well designed for 21st century Wyoming and its counties and municipalities. Until that point, we have a very limited number of arrows in our quiver, Lindsay, for actually making a difference. We have property tax, which the county does and the town doesn't. We have sales tax. We have lodging tax, which is a variation on sales tax. And we have one or two others that I'm blanking on at the moment. But the really significant ones were very, very constrained. And ultimately, until the state changes its philosophy toward how it funds state and local government, this is the best we have. It's not the best of all possible worlds. It's not the most representative. It's not the fairest. It's not the most equitable, but it's the best we got. And that's where we are.
Mark Barron, please.
This sales tax, if passed, will be here, period. It'll be renewed in 4 years and it'll stay. Whether that's good or bad, it'll make the spending abilities of 10 elected officials more lubricated. That's not a judgment, that's just a fact. Money's there, it does get invested. The lodging tax should be passed, doubled regardless of the sales tax. I keep hearing the sales tax is 55% paid by the visitors. I think what is meant is 55% of the revenue is collected from the visitors who are spending money here. 100% is paid by the locals. That's a 17% increase. It might not hurt a lot of people on this panel tonight. It may not hurt a lot of people in our community tonight, but it's going to be a pinch.
Okay, we are at 7:30. I would like to thank all of you. I think I'd like to thank certainly our media panelists, Billy and Lindsay, for great questions. I'd really like to thank our electeds, our town councilors and county commissioners, who have really informed me, and I believe have really informed our electorate that hopefully is listening to this. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, the Teton County Library, and our local media, I'd like to thank all of you. I'd like to remind everybody that this has been recorded. And if you would, do your neighbors and family a favor and let them know that, so that if they've not had the opportunity to watch this program tonight, that they can find that through the Teton County Library website. So this is the first of 5 forums, so there are 4 more to come. There's one tomorrow night on the county commission candidates. So I'd encourage everybody to look at the library website for that schedule, look ahead of time. It's also been in the paper. So thank you all very, very much. And, this has been, as Jim Stanford said, the bar was set low, very low last night, but this was a far, far better program, debate, if you will, than what we have seen. So thank you all very, very much, and good night. God bless.
Thank you, John.
Night.
High
Thank you
praise,
so
John.
much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Good night.